How we doing, people? Stock Retro Gamer here with some more Which Did It First magic for you. Let's race again. The racing game genre is vast, way too vast to cover all in one video. In my first video, I touched upon several racing games that pioneered some early mechanics and stylistic choices within the genre, and I've pretty much done the same here. Here we are again, looking at some more innovative racing games that shaped the genre. This is Racing Games, Which Did It First, Part 2. Let's take a look. Utilising a split-screen display is the standard approach for multiplayer gaming, as it allows each player to have an independent view rather than sharing a single static screen. Released in 1977 and developed by Key Games. Drag Race is a racing game released in arcades. It was multiplayer, where you play against a CPU or a second player. It would be the first racing game that featured the American racing subgenre, drag racing, where you would race dragster cars. The racing mechanics would be fairly strict, including perfect timing gear changes. Like the sport, you would need to race to the end of a short straight track to win, and if you shift a gear too fast you will blow the engine. Drag Race would be the first racing game that used a split screen method for multiplayer. This meant that each player had their own segment of the screen to view their progress in the race. Sounds fairly standard, doesn't it? But for the 1970s, this was mind-blowing. Multiplayer racing games were few and far between, and the ones that existed had you racing all on the same screen, like Space Race. Drag Race gave the player their own little bit of screen to focus on, which was nice. The split screen method would be adopted by all racing multiplayer games, and was the go-to method until online play came along. The Ghost Car introduced a CPU-controlled opponent that mimicked a player's best lap. This spectral speedster allowed players to visually race against their own previous performance, adding a strategic layer to gameplay and letting you see your mistakes in real time. Released in 1989 and developed by Atari Games. Hard Driving is a racing simulation game released in arcades and ported to several systems. The arcade would have you playing in a semi-enclosed cabinet which included pedals, a gear stick and a steering wheel. The game would be notable for its early 3D graphics and realistic features such as turning on the ignition and crashes. You could also perform death-defying stunts such as jumping over gaps and driving through loops like a roller coaster. Hard Driving was the first racing game to feature the Ghost Car when racing. Should you complete the laps in a good enough time, you get rewarded by being able to race the Phantom Photon car. Just seeing this purple, translucent automobile in action is quite impressive, and can imagine in 1989 was quite the spectacle. Now this Ghost Car isn't your best lap, but more a CPU-controlled opponent, similar to a boss fight. Hard Driving introduced a Ghost Car race concept, which later racing games used to reflect player performance. Hard Driving would win several awards, and would be followed up with two sequels, Race Driving in 1990, and Hard Driving 2, Drive Harder in 1991. Dynamic weather in racing games added realism and unpredictability to gameplay. No longer were races confined to static conditions. Instead, drivers had to adapt to sudden rain showers, fog or snow, each of which affected visibility, handling and strategy. Released in 1983 and developed by Activision. Enduro is a racing game released on the Atari 2600. The object of the game is to compete in an endurance race, where you would have to pass a certain number of cars to continue to the next day. The game had a day-night cycle, which was fairly impressive for an Atari title. At night, you would only be able to see the car's headlights, making overtaking said cars even more difficult. Enduro would be the first racing game that included dynamic weather. The racing would include segments of snow and fog, which both impeded the racer's sight when it was active. The fog in particular would make it so that you could only really see a few car lengths ahead of you, making navigation near impossible. I'm fairly certain these weather patterns only occurred at fixed times, so I'm unsure how dynamic this really was, but the inclusion of it was still appreciated. Enduro would receive praise with gaming critics and gamers alike, being noted for its addictive gameplay and variation in visuals. It wasn't sophisticated, it wasn't pretty, but it was first. Anti-gravity racing games introduced players to a thrilling new dimension of speed and freedom, breaking away from traditional wheels-on-track mechanics. By allowing vehicles to hover above the ground, these games unlocked imaginative track designs, marked by dizzying loops, vertical climbs and impossible twists that defy real-world physics. Released in 1988 and developed by Michael Powell, Powerdrome is a futuristic racing game released on the Atari ST and then ported to the Amiga and MS-DOS. You would race futuristic vehicles known as blades across 6 tracks and 5 planets. The view would be a cockpit dashboard view showing all the gauges and dials that were very cool to look at. The graphics were 3D, consisting of flat-shaded polygons, which for the time was very impressive. Powerdrome is the first racing game featuring anti-gravity racing, allowing vehicles to fly above the tracks and avoid issues like skidding due to no ground contact. This level of freedom and manoeuvrability was new to the racing game world, and was an exciting first step to where it could go. The tracks would have tunnels and segments that closed on you if you weren't too careful. You would also have the opportunity to use pit stops for things like repairs and refueling. Now, the controls weren't great, and the graphics, as impressive as they were for the time, were very minimal. Not to mention the horrible engine sound playing the whole time. Nevertheless, Powerdrome, with its anti-gravity racing and futuristic theme, was an exciting new take on the racing genre. Stumbling so games like F-Zero and Wipeout could run, and it makes the list. Today's racing games will give you an overwhelming choice of vehicle, ranging from manual, automatic, sports car, rally car, and everything in between. Released in 1983 and developed by Scion Software, Checkered Flag is a first-person racing game released on the Spectrum ZX. You could choose to race on up to 10 different tracks, the majority of which were based on real ones, like Circuit de Monaco and Silverstone. You'd be given the dashboard view with several different controls such as your gear stick, speedometer, fuel and temp gauges, and your steering wheel. It would be the first home version of a racing simulator. Checkered Flag would be the first racing game that gave you a choice of car to drive. The choice would be the McFaster Special, the Scion Pegasus, and the Ferretti Turbo. Obviously, these would all be made up names, referencing some big car brands at the time, McFaster being a McLaren nod, and Ferretti I'm guessing was Ferrari. Now, the actual in-game difference between these cars wasn't a whole lot, apart from some slight differences in the car bonnets, but it still counts. Although it would leave a lot to your imagination, which is fine. With its focus on car racing simulation and car choice, Checkered Flag would be a groundbreaking title for the time. Force feedback steering marked a transformative leap for racing games. By simulating the tactile sensations of real-world driving, such as resistance, vibrations, and jolts, these steering wheels immerse players in the physicality of racing, making virtual tracks feel far more authentic and engaging. Released in 1983 and developed by Tatsumi, TX1 is an arcade simulation racing game. It was housed in a fairly large enclosed arcade cabinet that included 3 screens for deeper immersion. The game put greater emphasis on the racing game simulation experience by making players downshift the gear during corners, and to let go of the accelerator when skidding to regain control. Can you imagine stepping into this thing in 1983? TX1 was the first racing game to feature realistic force feedback in its steering wheel, allowing players to feel vibrations that correlated with gameplay. Every bump, every skid, and every crash would cause vibration in the wheel. This new feature took driving simulations to a whole new level of realism for the player. This steering wheel feedback, coupled with the 3 screens and the enclosed cabinet, really gave the player that feeling of immersion, to the point where you'd probably forget you were playing an arcade game. TX1 also offered non-linear gameplay, letting you choose which route you wanted at the end of each stage, something that would later inspire the Outrun series. With its heavy lean into player immersion and its non-linear gameplay, TX1 set a new standard for racing simulations to follow.
Let it hit 'em.
Fully textured polygons were a game changer for graphics in the early 90s. We'd had 3D flat shaded polygons, and they were great, but developers knew more needed to be done for that lifelike experience. Released in 1993 and developed by Namco, Ridge Racer is a racing game released in arcades and ported to the PlayStation. Players would choose a difficulty, manual or automatic transmission, and a music track to race to. The cabinet included gears, pedals, and a force feedback steering wheel that added realism. The game only gave you one track to race on, so it was fairly limited in that respect, but you could set lap records and attempt to beat your personal best. Ridge Racer will be the first racing game to feature fully texture-mapped 3D polygons. But what does that mean? Well, these were 3D racing games before Ridge Racer. And this is Ridge Racer. It means the graphics had detail. The 3D polygons were given textures with different colours and shading, which in turn made the graphics more lifelike. For 1993, these were jaw-dropping, and there was really no going back after this.
You've changed things. Forever.
These textured graphics were achieved using the Namco System 22 arcade board, a very sophisticated piece of arcade equipment that Namco would use for Time Crisis and Dirt Dash in the years to come. Now, Ridge Racer wasn't just the first racing game to use these graphics, it was the first arcade game to, like, ever. Pretty much bringing texture polygons to the masses in a fast-paced, fun way. Now, it technically wasn't the first ever video game to, as I believe some games on MS-DOS were using these, but arcade games were the games making the headlines in those days. The game would be ported to, and be a launch title for the Sony PlayStation in 1995, where it would find even more fame given the console's popularity. The PlayStation version would also see several improvements, including a third-person view, and a mirrored version of the track. Ridge Racer would be highly praised on release for its lifelike graphics, and became the highest selling arcade game in Japan, the US, and Europe over 1993-94. It would have several sequels and spin-off games in the years to come, and is a milestone in video game graphics. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you feel there's any glaring omissions, then you might want to check out my Racing Games Part 1 video. I've also covered a bunch more gaming genres in this series that might interest you. Be sure to mention your favourite racing games in the comments and why. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, as it really helps the channel, guys. I'll do run and guns, or possibly real-time strategies for my next one of these vids. What do you think? A Racing Games Part 3? Maybe. I've been the Stock Retro Gamer, and I'll catch you in the next one.
You